This is 16 to 1, a podcast about education, teaching, and learning.
Howdy.
Hi.
What's up?
Nothing too much.
No?
It's felt like a leisurely weekend. I crossed a lot of things off my to-do list last week. After that episode on procrastinating, I really tried to drill down and not
got to work.
do that as much. So, my email inbox is looking nice and slim.
You did say you spent like a whole day on that, so that's
I just
good.
went through my email and tried to find everything I was supposed to be doing for forever and try to do all of the things. I still have one thing that I kind of need to stop procrastinating on.
Sure.
How are you doing? How are you feeling?
Doing okay.
Yeah.
I'm here.
You're here?
We made it through the first semester of school, and I didn't think we would make it that far.
The first semester?
Yeah, in person.
When does it
thought.
end? Is it like officially over?
Oh, it's over.
Now?
Yeah.
It's over now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is week one of a new semester.
Week one of the new semester.
So
okay.
Second semester. We're halfway.
Okay.
Year 8.
This.
You
got this. Year 8. Oh, yeah. You kept telling people it was year 7.
I know. I think we did the math
But apparently it's year 8
well,
of you teaching. I think we said you were in year 7 at some point in the podcast.
Last year that was true.
She's way more of an expert than we all thought.
Maybe it was last year.
1 year more of expertise. Yeah, you're right. It could have been.
Maybe we just haven't updated them since then.
It's true. It's true. Yeah.
No, we've made it halfway, and I didn't know if we were going to make it all of the first semester in person, which we did. We were never forced to. I mean, aside from like individuals being quarantined, we never went to like a full school sort of thing.
Right.
So I am pleasantly surprised by that, actually.
Good.
How are you?
I'm good.
Your inbox is down.
My inbox is down.
And you've been really busy.
I've been very busy with work. Yeah.
Anything else? You're mad about this episode.
Oh, this episode just got me really worked up.
Mm-hmm. Anything else, though?
Yeah. Well, no. Yeah. I mean, I don't know.
Since we last recorded, our last episode, we recorded the day before.
Oh, yeah.
Everything happened.
Yeah, we did. We put out that episode the day after. So we had recorded the day before. We put it out the day after.
Yes.
So it probably felt like we were completely clueless as to the state of the things in the United States.
Like we were living in an actual bubble.
But we pre-recorded it, obviously. So we didn't. Yeah, so that happened. So we all survived that.
I've been pretty reliant on coffee. And I'm not going to say it's because of that, but it's definitely been a factor for me.
Yeah. I've been drinking a full pot of coffee every day.
My anxiety has been pretty much out of control since then.
Full pot of coffee, a lot of G Fuel. That's how I'm getting through. That's how I'm getting through the days.
So we're all surviving.
I'm working a lot more hours. We're trying to, also have fun and stream and play games and do stuff like that. So we're trying to keep sane by doing fun things.
Sure.
It's been very cold, so it's not, and also
snow.
Pandemic, so it's not like we can go out and about too easily, but we're trying to,
It's been a pretty bleak few weeks, I think.
Yeah.
I think it's just the state of the world. And so the day that this drops will be one day post
inauguration.
Yes.
Right.
So let's see what that's like in 2 weeks.
Yep.
But
looking forward to a new administration, not going to lie.
But our topic this week is relevant, actually.
Yeah, it really is.
Far more relevant than we thought it was when we chose it.
It is. It's going to be a really interesting... Yeah. So we have some tie-ins with the new incoming Biden administration because this week we're talking about education for incarcerated people. So education in the prison system, mostly in the United States.
Yeah.
Yeah. We talked about the school to prison pipeline. That episode also got me really riled up in some ways. So... Yeah, I don't know what it is about this or this problem. I think it's just because there's, in my mind, so much social injustice in the United States around this issue. And even just from a purely economical standpoint, the decisions that have been made around this issue drive me insane because it just makes no sense what we have decided to do as a country about some of these things. But we'll dive into it. Do you want to get started?
Do you want me to start with this prison studies project?
Yeah, just dive on in.
The first thing that I feel like we should start with is there's a group or this project called the Prison Studies Project, and it was created in 2008 by Kaya Stern and Bruce Western, and it was created or launched rather this Prison Studies Project, PSP as they call it, at Harvard, and they were doing it to promote informed conversation conversations about the challenges of mass incarceration. So it came from the Harvard Law School's Charles Hamilton Houston Institute for Race and Justice. So that's kind of the home. But they have focused since 2008 on research, education, and policy change. And
Around incarceration generally?
right.
Okay.
And like the need for education to be a factor in it, and how tax dollars can be better used, essentially.
Right. I just want to note, as is probably normal at this point, we're going to kind of spend a lot of time talking about the United States prison system and education in prisons in the U.S., just because that's what we know and that's what we do. And also, it's probably, I mean, at least for this country, it's a very pressing problem, I think.
It is.
So again, if anyone's listening outside of the U.S., I'm sure these problems are not exclusive to the United States,
right.
but it is a very large problem in the United States because of the rate of incarceration in the United States, which is very, very high, especially compared to peer countries. We, as a percentage of the population, we imprison way more people than other developed countries do.
For sure.
Which is really upsetting. And also, I was reading a stat when I was researching this episode that said something like, in certain population centers in the United States, it gets to be close to 1 in every 100 people are incarcerated.
That's actually insane to me.
It is wild. It is very wild.
Oh,
So
that's like kind of hard
I think
to work
Louisiana
through.
was one of the places that I read that statistic. So anyway. So it's a big
So
problem.
heavy.
We're diving in.
Okay, so
Yeah, back to the prison
this-
studies project.
Yeah, the PSP, their studies conducted over the last 2 decades almost unanimously indicate that higher education and prison programs reduces the recidivism, and that translates into reduction in crime, obviously. That saves money for taxpayers, and it also has long-term contributions to the safety and well-being of the communities to where these incarcerated people return. So there's a direct correlation in that. They said that compared with 18% of the general population, approximately 41% of incarcerated people do not hold a high school diploma.
Okay, so non-incarcerated people, 18% do not have high school diploma.
Yes.
41%.
Of those
So
incarcerated
just a little under half of people.
do not.
Okay.
A high correlation exists between the level of education attained by an incarcerated person and his or her recidivism rate. And so the American Correctional Association has reported that in Indiana, the recidivism rate for GED completers is 20% lower than the general prison population's rate. And the recidivism rate for college degree completers is 44% lower than the general population's. So essentially what they're saying is that the higher the degree earned, the lower the recidivism rate.
Yeah, I thought this was really interesting. Just in case listeners don't know what that word means, that's recidivism is your likelihood to be reincarcerated.
Right.
So come back to prison once
To
you've been
return,
released because of a new offense.
And then the last thing that I found really interesting from the PSP was that there was a study done by the Department of Policy Studies at UCLA, and they found that, and this is a direct quote, but quote, $1 million investment in incarceration will prevent about 350 crimes, while that same investment in a correctional education will prevent more than 600 crimes. So correctional education is almost twice as cost effective as incarceration.
I put some expletives after
You
that
put a big
statistic.
capital, yeah.
I put expletives after that statistic in the show notes because that blows my mind. That when you think of that and you think of the problems of incarceration in the United States and how much, not because it's just the right thing to do, aside from that, but the economic impact of simply shifting $1 million from keeping people in prisons to educating people in prisons, it's almost half the crime that comes out of that. I just...
That one was really hard for me to
It's
kind of put
twice
together.
as cost effective as incarceration.
Yeah.
That's education in prisons. So the fact that we're not doing a whole lot more of it is very concerning, and it makes you ask questions. Hey, why are we not doing that? It almost seems like we want to keep people in prison and coming back to prison.
For sure. In my head, though, that investment, right, the $1 million, it makes sense to me. It wasn't surprising for me to read that and for me to be like, well, of course it does. You know what I mean? That's where it gets hard for me, is like to me, it wasn't mind-blowing to find this out. So I'm not sure why we can't do anything with that information.
Yeah.
Which I know is a whole other issue. But in my head, I'm like, yes, of course. And
I forget. I looked up another statistic. I'm not sure if I put it in the notes, but it was something like comparing the cost of educating one student in like K-12, and it was like twice as much the cost per annulum to keep somebody incarcerated.
Yes.
We're spending twice as much money keeping people locked in cells as we are on educating people in compulsory schools in this country.
Yep.
I'm already irritated.
Yeah,
okay.
you're gonna get pretty worked up. I'm just gonna
Yeah.
sit here and let you work through it. It's gonna be easier for me that way.
I just, well, so like I do, I looked into the history of this problem, going back a little ways, looking at sort of the history of education programs in prisons in the United States. As you can imagine, as with all things educational in the United States, prison education programs started out as being primarily religious in nature. Secular programming developed around helping people be able to read Bibles and other religious texts. Surprise, surprise. Same thing happened in public education sectors. So the first major education program sort of focused on rehabilitating prisoners was launched in 1876. So it's been around for a while. By 1900, the states of Massachusetts, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Indiana, Illinois, and Minnesota had adopted rehabilitative education programs. By the 1930s, education programs could be found in most prisons in the U.S. So tertiary education programs, that's college level education, did not appear until much, much later. And this is where it starts to be a little bit relevant to the current political moment. But in 1960, there were only 9 states that were offering college level education to inmates. By 1983, programs were available in most states. In 1965, President Johnson signed the Higher Education Act, and this allowed people in prisons to begin receiving Pell Grants. Pell Grant funding.
Not for long.
Yeah. So, again, this is, 65. Johnson signed into law the Higher Education Act. It allowed people in prisons to begin receiving Pell Grant funding for college courses, and that started working in 1972. So it took a while to get there, but a couple years later, in 72, prisoners could apply for Pell Grant funding. Pell Grants help people from under-resourced communities apply to receive money to go get college courses, college education.
Yeah, they're
and it's
one
not
of those
just
crucial things
right.
for people as far as
It's also not just for incarcerated people. Pell Grants, you can apply for funding. For
right,
Pell
and
Grants
they're
from
important
anywhere.
because they're not alone.
They're not loans. They're just money.
That's what's so important about them, though, is that what's going to happen is even worse because of the fact that it's stripping money from the people who. Anyways, I'll let you get there.
Yeah. So between 72 and 1995, inmates in the U.S. were able to apply for Pell Grants. So that's what we were just talking about. But there's this big crime bill that comes along. However, there's a big however. In 1994, Congress passed the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act, which denies Pell Grants to anyone who is incarcerated. The legislation, commonly called the Clinton Crime Bill or the Biden Crime Law, provided for 100,000 new peace officers. I didn't like that term, but that's what the article called them. So it's just like, correctional officers, basically. Peace officers is an interesting way to say that.
Is.
$9.7 billion in funding for prisons and $6.1 billion in funding for prevention programs, which were designed with significant input from experienced police officers. Which... Why? But okay.
Keep going.
Anyway, moving on. So then Senator Joe Biden of Delaware drafted the Senate version of the legislation in cooperation with the National Association of Police Organizations, also incorporating the Violence Against Women Act with Senator Orrin Hatch. Okay, so Biden was roundly criticized for this in the presidential election cycle, and he absolutely should have been, because this is just, based on the statistics that we read up earlier alone, this should never have happened because it costs taxpayers less to allow incarcerated people to apply for Pell Grant funding.
Yes.
But somebody along the line was like, oh, we got to get tough on crime. We got to take away privileges from people who are incarcerated. And the short-sightedness of that approach just cannot be understated.
Right.
So Biden at first was not saying whether or not he'd repeal this Pell Grant restriction. He was kind of dancing around it because he wrote the Senate legislation. He was 100% behind this 94 crime bill. And he wasn't alone. The majority of the Congressional Black Caucus voted in favor of doubling down on mass incarceration and mandatory minimums, which is just wild looking back. But anyway, so as a result of this crime bill, by 2005, only about a dozen prisons in the United States were offering post-secondary education compared to 350 prisons in the early 90s. In 2015, Barack Obama created a pilot program that allowed a limited number of inmates to receive Pell Grants again. More than 200 colleges in 47 states subsequently expressed interest in running educational programs for prisoners. Trump admin considered this pilot a success. I'm kind of surprised by that, but there we go. Too. There's bipartisan congressional support for repealing the Pell ban altogether. And Biden has actually committed to repealing the Pell Grant ban. Okay. I spent a lot of time digging through his platform on his election website about sort of prison justice oriented stuff.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is just doing the opposite of the 94 crime bill, which I find really interesting. But here we are.
Yeah.
These sort of tough on crime stances do not
They didn't do
end
what
up
they were supposed
benefiting anybody. They don't benefit prisoners. They don't benefit taxpayers. They don't benefit
to. Communities.
They don't benefit systems of higher education. You know, nobody comes out ahead
Because
on
of
this
it.
tough on crime, forget about everything else, we just have to punish people approach, especially when it comes to recidivism. It just doesn't work. So anyway, yeah, I just makes my skin crawl. But yeah, so I just threw in another fun fact here at the end, which I thought was interesting. Oh, this is the stat I was talking about. In 2016, U.S. Department of Ed released an analysis which showed that over the course of 3 decades, from 1979 to 2013, state and local spending on prisons and jails increased at 3 times the rate of funding for pre-K public education over the same years. Pre-K through 12 public education over the same years. So spending for jails and prisons increased at 3 times the rate of funding for public education in this country. If that doesn't tell you that we're really screwed up, I don't know what will.
This is the defunding that everyone is talking about. This is where that happens.
When we talk about things like defunding police systems and defunding prison systems, we're not talking about taking away money altogether to make these parts of society function. We're talking about reallocating money that currently goes to those systems. So like money that keeps somebody incarcerated. What if we reappropriated that money and put it toward prison education systems? Well, then you would have half as many inmates. Because of of the statistics that we know about education and recidivism.
Right.
You wouldn't have to spend the money on keeping people incarcerated because you would have avoided the problem altogether.
Right.
So anyway, yeah.
Yikes.
I know. It's a big one. I have a lot of feels. A lot of feels about this one.
Yeah.
What does is there sort of like a unified system of education in the U.S. prisons, or is it state by state?
It's state by state.
Yeah.
So like most states have, in the case of Ohio, like we have county jails, right? And then we have state prisons. And then some states will also have federal prisons.
Yeah, we have one.
We have
Ohio,
one,
I think.
So it's all based on your state. In Ohio, there's one district that serves all of the state prisons.
So it's sort of like the equivalent of a state department of education in every state.
Yes.
Runs the state prison education system.
Yeah, and it's just a matter of however they choose to kind of handle it. I didn't look at how the federal prisons would do it. I'm not sure.
Well, I looked it up a little bit, but it's a little bit disappointing. They kind of have like a milquetoast. We have a policy of, providing educational opportunities to prison. That was about all I could find in terms of useful information about.
Yeah.
So it sounds like it does happen. It probably happens at about the same rate that it happens in state prisons, I would assume.
Probably so. What I was trying to say is I'm just not sure if the state that federal prison is located is in charge of that education system there.
Oh, probably not.
So that's where I didn't get.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I was kind of just looking up. Yeah, I was looking up general kind of state prison systems. They bear responsibility for implementing education programs in general, and because state budgets have, not been, they're pretty much as tight as they've ever been. Those really tight budgets threaten the ability of states to maintain funding commitments to prison education programs, in spite of federal grant funding, which obviously was also dwindling. Yeah. Outside of funding, there are also other issues. One example that I found was only 14% of students in prison are allowed restricted internet access.
Not surprising, unfortunately.
Well, right, when so much of the world happens on the internet, it's just kind of no wonder that recidivism is as much of a problem as it is, because if you're completely unprepared to encounter a world, much of which occurs on the internet now, it's no wonder you're going to feel out of place in a system like that. But anyway, I just had like a kind of general observation too. Just after grad school, I was working in a nonprofit, and one of the parts of their programming was doing a prison education program, basically. And I never actually went into the prisons, but I ran some of the administrative back end for that programming. And it was the most difficult thing in the world to try to even just provide volunteer programming to this prison. It was completely volunteer basis. We were doing it for free.
Were these state
bringing
prisons?
our materials. This was a state prison, and it just even trying to call the prison to talk to, because we had to
Couldn't get to humans, probably.
Right. No, we had to submit ahead of time the list of people who are coming in, so you could be you know, on the list, the visitor list for that day.
Sure.
If you didn't do that, or half the time you call, you couldn't get anybody in the office. You would email, nobody would respond. You know, it's not as if they're not dealing with a bunch of their own problems. Anyway, so it's not necessarily the fault of whomever we were talking to, but even just volunteering on a volunteer basis, creating educational programming in prisons, there are so many apparent hurdles. There's so many things that stand in the way of people just even providing this on a volunteer basis that it doesn't surprise me that there's such an issue with getting educational programming into prisons. So do you want to talk a little more about the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction? Just kind of talking about Ohio stuff a little bit there.
The Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction put out a statement in 2019, and it says, quote, "It is the policy of the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction, which they call the ODRC, to provide for a comprehensive education program available to all inmates who are eligible, to include the following: educational philosophy and goals, communication skills, general education, basic academic schools, high school equivalency preparation, special ed, career tech education, advanced job training education, high school ed, and apprentice programming. Other educational programs shall be developed as dictated by the needs of the institution's population." So that's kind of their blanket state for their goals, if that makes sense.
It's interesting that it said that we have a policy. So it almost makes, and I'm not really sure about this because I didn't get to do quite as deep of a dive as I would have liked to on this issue, but the issue of prison policy versus state law. Yeah. Like this says it's our policy. So policies are interesting little things because you can have policies, but you can also just change policies on a whim, particularly if funding is in flux. So it's just like, well, our policy was that, but now we don't have any money, so it's not our policy anymore. You know, we kind of need to start thinking, and this is what, again, it was interesting to hear Biden kind of completely reverse course on his crime bill, because we need, in order to ensure that prison education continues to happen, we need it kind of codified. We need it to be law rather than policy.
Yeah. So as I said, the school district that services the incarcerated, at least in those state prison levels, is called the Ohio Central School System. They call themselves the OCSS. And so this data is from 2018. That's the most recent data. And I'm going to guess that the 2020 data would probably be very interesting to look at, because there was some releases from state prisons that our governor allowed because of COVID to help kind of cut down the population. So this is pre-COVID 2018 data. And like I said, this is 28 prisons. And so these are not the county jails. But the inmate population for that year was 49,379 people. The students totally enrolled for any of the services, basically, that policy covered is 28,602. So
a little more than half.
Yes.
And again, this is not just toward a high school diploma. This could be career training.
Right.
Or, you know, a lot of times people, we've been watching a show. What's this show called? I think it's like World's Toughest Prisons or something. This guy, he was wrongfully imprisoned. Raphael Rowe, I think his name is. He was convicted of a murder in the UK and did 12 years, but it's been interesting to see him because often he'll interview a lot of the prisoners in these places, and they talk about how whatever it is they're doing in prison, you know, even just as like their prison job, you know, cooks and people building things, tinkering stuff, they're saying like, I'm going to use this when I get out. I'm hoping I'm going to be able to be employed when I get out.
These skills.
Because I'm learning this skill here in prison, especially that I didn't have before. I remember him talking to a guy who was doing pastries. He was making pastries. He was like, I want to be a pastry chef when I get out. So it's that kind of stuff too. It's not just like GED or high school equivalencies or college courses. It's also all kinds of other sorts of educational opportunities. So
But that year, so they had more than 28,000 enrolled, but that year they served actually more than 40,000. So they served over 81% of their inmates with some form of this OCSS, like the school system.
So this is like the 28,600 was like people enrolled in the school system. The other stuff was
on top of that, other things that they offer. So like they'll also I think they said that every person who didn't score a high enough literacy rating had to take the literacy course. So there were like all types of things that they were trying to offer. So you can get like a GED or your high school diploma, and that would include your state required graduation testing system, which is what I test in my, job. They have special ed in Title I. They have apprenticeships. They have opportunities that are similar to like a career or technical school that you would go to maybe like your junior or senior year of high school. And they also have, for some inmates, an opportunity to tutor other students, so other inmates, which I thought was kind of cool. And the other data that the state shared was that they had more than 50,000 books donated to them. And so it seems like their library is pretty well utilized. And actually, Chelsea and I looked into that because she had had known, at least, that in other times it's been very hard to donate to prisons.
Yeah, somewhere along the line, a kind of group of my friends started calling attention to the fact that, and this is, I think, especially probably true in for-profit prisons, but there are policies and laws being passed in some of these places, or maybe it's just the prison policy that you can't even donate books to prison libraries. Ostensibly, the reason for that is because they're an avenue for contraband to enter the prison system.
Sure.
But honestly, I feel that's a bit of a weak. I don't like it. Basically, I don't like that we can't even donate educational materials to prisons. But yeah,
we did find places where you could.
Yeah, there are some interesting organizations, nonprofits, companies, all kinds of stuff that are dedicated to the problem of getting educational literature into prison library systems, or just books. So there are people out there doing that work, but I just know that in general, it's probably getting more difficult rather than easier to donate books to prison libraries.
Sure.
A lot of times they require you to order brand new books off of Amazon and directly ship it to the prison so that there could be no, whatever tampering with it or whatever. But it's just, a lot of times people don't want to buy brand new books. They want to donate what they have. They want to just support in the easiest possible way what is already a difficult, funding situation or whatever it is. So it just has been discouraging to hear that that's becoming even more restrictive in some places. But just, there are, like you said, there are organizations out there that are kind of dedicated to the good work of making sure that books get into prison libraries. So, yeah.
So I had a little bit of an experience with this, but it was only because I was placed actually for teaching hours during my undergrad in our county JDC, so the Juvenile Detention Center. So I was there a semester. I think I was there one day a week, maybe two, but only a few hours every week. And so I saw students that were usually coming and going from other systems that maybe were having problems at school or had gotten you know what I mean? There's a lot of reasons a student can end up in the JDC.
And they can even do that for truancy.
Yeah.
I was reading about this too, because they're status offenses is what they're called for when you end up in juvenile detention for doing something that, had you been a legal adult or over a certain age, would not have been an offense. So they're called status offenses. Yeah. So a lot of times kids end up in juvenile detention not even for not for particularly problematic crimes, but because they were drinking underage or because they broke curfew or were truant or whatever. Yeah.
Right. But the JDC I was in, it was pretty small, and we were never, I don't think our class ever had more than 12 people in it at a time. So it was never at that time near capacity by any means. There was always room, which maybe that's probably a good thing, but still. So they had two teachers there. I think it was actually based on the content, because I distinctly remember another teacher, but I remember the girls going to him as well. So it must have been, they just taught their subject areas. But being an English teacher, I obviously was there for the English time. And so when students this is 10 years ago, but when they were sent to JDC, they were only doing basically core classes. So when they left whatever school they were coming from to come in here, it's not like this, the JDC told the teacher where they were.
What's a core class?
Core classes are English, math, science, history.
Yeah, graduation requirement.
Grad requirements.
Okay. So these kids aren't having opportunity to explore their passions through electives.
Well, not a lot of times, because the goal ultimately of JDC is not to be there long. So they don't really, not that they shouldn't, but the goal, I think the longest I saw a kid there was 4 or 5 weeks. It doesn't mean they aren't there longer.
So the goal is to get them back
out moving
as quickly as possible.
That's the hope, but that doesn't always, we had, a couple kids come back and forth a few times, but those things can also happen because of incidents at home or whatever. A large population of our JDC students were also in the child protective services system as well. So we're dealing with a lot of things with these students.
I think I read, what did I say? 1 in 4 kids who are in the foster system end up in prison.
It was something like that.
Something really crazy like that. By the time they're out of the foster system, 1 in 4 of them will end up in prison.
So I thought when I went into there that it was going to be very strict, secure learning, because I was like, oh, they're here. There aren't attendance, and there were attendance issues because these kids had to see lawyers. They had to see, whoever. So
CPS workers.
Even though they were there, they were not always there. Yeah.
So they're there, but it's scheduled at the same time as all these important
because
meetings.
you're talking people who work 9 to 5 jobs or 10, you know what I mean? That's when they're there. And so that was the hard thing, was even though you would be there and you'd be doing English, so-and-so might have to go meet with a rep or whoever it is. But the goal was just to keep them learning, essentially. In my experience now as a classroom teacher, when students come and go to JDC, I say come and go like they have the option, but when that's, when that happens to them, it's really hard for teachers to get them back on track when they return in school. And it's hard for the students as well, because they've gone from a very strict lockdown to then being back in a public high school.
I would also imagine it's jarring because they go from following the lesson plans a certain teacher or grade level has outlined to a completely different, separate, divided educational prison.
And in the JDC,
system.
everyone in English, no matter their age, was doing the same thing. Ooh. So you could have kids as young as 14, and some, if they were 18, they weren't there for long. If they'd either dropped out or if they were being moved to jail or whatever, depending on what was happening for them. So that was the other interesting thing, was that you would be teaching the same thing to every age level, even if they were 4 years apart, which they could be. But it really...
That seems wildly inappropriate for an educational system, but
I
okay.
mean, I'm not disagreeing with that, but I don't know how that teacher could possibly create...
Oh, yeah, I don't mean to place the blame on the teacher in that situation.
But even in the public high school I work at, we have a list every year of students that we're concerned about. We track birthdays and things, because we're trying to keep them, and we're worried that this could happen. Yeah. And so the JDC being there, that really opened my eyes. We had to wear very strict clothing. If the teacher hadn't told them we were going to be there that day, the guards, we weren't allowed in, even though we were there weekly.
Yep, that's the same thing with us.
We went in there
lockdown, on a set schedule in the state prison in Maryland. We were on a set schedule. We were there every Tuesday or something like that at a certain time. Yeah. And even so, you still had to have your visitor list approved ahead of time. It's just and
we would get there. we probably got there 5 or 6 times. So something was happening inside. We couldn't go in. Yeah. So we'd be told to go home. Oh yeah. Or we were there for a lockdown once. Or it really opened my eyes.
You have a note here that says that you have to check in and out. You have to check in and out pencils.
Yeah, they couldn't have pencils on their own. We had them numbered,
bolted to the floor.
Yeah, it was eye-opening. We couldn't carry anything on us, so I would have to email the teacher anything that I wanted to do with them, because I couldn't bring in.
You had to have it there ahead of time.
Yeah. So to her great credit, she was great at communicating, but you would have to be to work there. Yeah. But there's something very odd about the fact. We always had someone in the room with a guard in the room with us, but there's a very odd fact that you are stuck in this room and that you can't just, you're in there. That's it. Yeah. For however long English class is, we are all together here. Yeah. So it was, oh my gosh, I was 20. When I was 20, I was like, oh my goodness, I don't know. It was a whole experiment. And that was only a JDC. That wasn't a state prison like what we were talking about. But the classrooms were really bare. And that teacher was incredible. She was working magic in there. Those kids really respected her. And she taught me a lot too. But to have the energy to do that would be very hard. And there's a high turnover rate, obviously, for teachers who work in prison systems or JDCs or something. It's a very hard environment. Yeah. It's really hard. So very eye-opening. Yeah. Really tough hands that they were dealt to play. But holy cow, does it make me, it's rough. Yeah. So I don't think there's ever going to be enough we can do for those students, but I also, yeah, it's hard when you feel like they didn't really have a chance to begin with. Right. And that's how I felt with a lot of those guys. And I say guys because I was I was truly with the boys. The boys had the male population was quadruple that of the women. Wow. Of the young ladies. There was probably at most 5 young ladies in there at the time. Wow. There'd be as many as 20 of the young men. So it was just disproportionately that way, but I was never in the classroom with the young ladies, so my experience was just the males. Very interesting.
Ugh, rough.
My parents, when I told them, they were like, you got placed where? Yeah. Because we didn't have an option. We just got told where we went. And I was like, come again. Oh, okay, let's do it. I was excited to go.
I think...
Still interesting.
You and I were talking about this before the show, but we were talking, at least I was saying that I think a lot of this is evidence that we treat education as a privilege. I think even within the prison system, it's like you're punished by not being able to learn. It comes back to that episode we were talking about, like recess. Like we were talking about how recess is used as a privilege, and instead we should treat it as a necessary part of the day so that students can learn the best way they can learn. And I think that we really should start in this country, especially, to look at education the same way. We should not treat it as the special thing that you get. I don't think we can afford to treat education as a privilege. We should treat it as a right. First of all, I mean, this prison education stuff is a good example because we can't, just economically speaking, it's hugely more cost effective to educate rather than continue to incarcerate. So even on the basis of that alone, it makes me at least think that education should not be a privilege, but it should be a right. And it's just like, even when we're talking about this language of rights that we have granted as citizens of this country because of the Constitution, how do you even know what those rights and duties and responsibilities are without a proper education? So it continues to baffle me that we treat education as a kind of treat that you get if you behave well, rather than a right that citizens should be given in order to ensure the proper functioning of democracy. It just continues to blow my mind that we treat it that way, because it's in our own best interest as a nation, as a world, to educate people. It's in our own best interest. We can only come out better because of it collectively.
Yeah, I agree.
That's why I get a bee in my bonnet about this stuff.
Well, it's also why the conversation surrounding defunding is so important, because by defunding parts of it,
the criminal justice system, is that what you're talking about?
Like there's a lot to be done, and that prove, like, the statistics literally should, like, it's there. We just have to figure out how to, manipulate it to work. But that's
I think we have to do things like stop allowing the existence of for-profit prisons.
Sure.
We have to stop allowing entities whose sole purpose is to make money off of incarcerated people.
Right.
The fact that we've gotten to that place as a country is very sad to me. And I don't even mean, obviously this sounds like a left-wing flight of fancy to say this kind of stuff, but I feel it's unfortunate to me that the issue is even politicized, because it's just,
I agree.
The evidence speaks to the fact that it's in everybody's best interest to treat these issues this way. It doesn't have to be a party line thing. It shouldn't be, because it's just very obviously better for everyone involved. If we don't have these kind of systems of oppression and, repeat offenders, and like we set people up to fail by our attitudes about education in this country. So I think we have a lot of room for improvement. I'm excited about where the future is going to go. I don't mean to be like such a downer about all of this, but I do think that we need a huge tone shift about the language of education as a privilege, and we need. I feel like I've said this before. I feel like I'm becoming a broken record on this podcast, but I think we need a tone shift about all of that, because we need to treat it as a right. We need to. Because we can't function. We can't function without learning. We can't function without knowing what our rights and responsibilities are.
A lot of work to be done.
Yeah. Nowhere to go but up.
I mean, that's maybe the, the shining hope is that it can't get worse.
The shine on top of the turd, as it were.
Yeah, if we were gonna, anyways.
Yeah,
okay.
Anyway. Do you want to get to the fill in the blank?
I'm like, not quite. Yeah, past all that.
Just pause for a second.
On this day, January 7th in 1800, the 13th U.S. President, Millard Fillmore, was born. Fillmore was not a popular president, but made his mark by being one of only 4 presidents to be a member of which political party?
The
Whig Party.
W-H-I-G.
The Whigs.
Not the thing on top of your head.
But also that. Okay.
But also that, yeah.
Separately.
Whig.
So.
The Whig Party.
This episode's question.
Yeah.
Chelsea
I'm excited about this.
Chelsea had to do her homework.
Yeah, we watched... Okay, so in addition to that prison show, we also watched Shawshank Redemption.
Which you have to.
Yeah.
In order to do this episode, you have to.
Which is one of your favorite...
Top 5 for me.
Films.
Yeah.
So the question this week is about that. It's one of Morgan Freeman's most famous movies, The Shawshank Redemption, is about the maybe wrongly imprisoned Andy Dufresne, played by Tim Robbins, and his efforts to create and build a library for the men imprisoned at the Shawshank State Prison. Andy's efforts would not be possible without this character, who serves as a sole employee at the library until Andy comes along. Fun hint, this character has a pet bird named Jake. What is the name of that character?
One of the best characters in the whole movie.
Yeah, you like him. He's pretty cool.
Oh, he's great. One of the best movies. Shot
Blank.
here in Ohio?
Blank was here.
Yes.
Yeah, it was.
Rip.
It was shot at a former
Mansfield
Was it
Reformatory.
a former state penitentiary?
State penitentiary, yeah.
Yeah.
And now you can tour it, and you can do ghost hunts there.
Ghost hunts.
And the tree that's in the movie, the big one, where Andy buries the thing for Red, that tree just fell down a couple years ago. It was struck by lightning.
sad.
But my mom and I drove out there and we saw it before it came down. It was really
Oh,
beautiful.
good.
Yeah.
You got
But
to
it
see
did come down.
Wow, sad.
Rip. All right.
Yeah. Anyway, moving on. What did you learn this week?
Last thing.
Yeah. What did you learn?
What did I learn? Well, I learned a very valuable lesson.
Oh, what's that?
I needed snow boots.
Yeah.
So we went to the outlet mall for snow boots because it's called an outlet mall. So I believed that there would be...
Deep discounts. Sale, sale, sale.
Yes, at the outlet.
Get your low-cost items here.
So I'm like, I mean, whatever. It was fine. There were some good deals. There were. Not everything, but some. Got home. My dad, I'm telling him about how I didn't think things were as discounted as before. And he was like, oh, well, not all stores in an outlet mall are actually outlet stores. And I was like, I'm sorry, what?
You got bamboozled
I was like, what?
by the outlet empire.
Tanger really got me this time.
Tanger.
So yeah, I mistakenly thought that if you were a store in an outlet mall, you were truly an outlet store.
Yeah.
And I feel like most of them there are.
I discovered
true.
that wasn't true when I looked at the price tag for a freaking flannel shirt and it was $155. I was like, no,
Well,
thank you.
we learned it a couple different times yesterday, but I was just like, oh, I must have been there on a sale, whatever. And then I was like, there's no way. Like, this isn't an outlet at all.
It's just full priced items
It was just full price items. who
packaged
sometimes
up in
have-
an quote unquote outlet bundle.
Yeah, so that was not something I felt great about, but I did learn it. And so I guess now what's good is that my expectations are much lower.
Yeah,
for
I've
shopping there.
recalibrated my expectations about outlet
So,
shopping. Although,
If you're looking for a deal,
I got a great deal though.
you did get a great deal, but I'm just saying, if you're generally looking for a good deal, it's not always there.
Yeah, it's not. Don't always assume that the lowest
And
price
some of the
is gonna
stuff
be
that we
happening at
found in the
outlet.
store, we looked online and it was cheaper online.
Yeah.
So,
So-
pooey on them.
Do a price check. Do a price comparison check before you buy stuff from outlets because it's not necessary. Outlet malls, at least.
I just got angry again.
Outlet malls are not always full of outlet
All right,
stores.
what did you learn?
Okay, so we've been watching this. We watched The Mandalorian. We binged The Mandalorian, and we loved it. So the Star Wars TV show. We've watched both seasons of it that exist so far. Now we're watching a making of documentary about The Mandalorian, and it's like Jon Favreau and all these interesting directors and actors and all this stuff. So we're watching this show, and they were talking about special effects and budgeting for special effects and all kinds of stuff. They do so many cool things now. They put these people in what they call it the volume, which is a kind of a creepy name for it. But everyone had started talking about the volume when we were watching this documentary. And I'm like, they're like, oh, we were in the volume. I'm like, you were in the volume? Are you always in a volume? But okay, this is the volume. But it's this weird like kind of bubble where they have essentially like digital screens set up all around so that light and shadow happen the way that like, they project stuff on these screens and it creates light and shadow that is how you would want to do light and shadow for real so that they don't have to digitally edit
anything
stuff
with it,
later
yeah.
to put in fake light and shadow so that
Very cool.
the actors can be they're standing in front of what is basically a fancy blue screen or green screen, but it's like they can see the horizon or the sunset or whatever it is, so they don't just have to react to a blank fake.
Yeah,
screen.
Giancarlo Esposito was like, it's like really a new day.
Yeah, he's like talking about how I don't have to hold it all in my head as an actor.
Yeah.
I can
You just react.
see it.
Truly,
I can just see.
It was really cool.
Like I can see the TIE fighters fighting, or I can see
he's standing
the
on
planet,
it,
or
looking
whatever
at the
it is.
sun, or it was
Really
very cool
cool
to hear the.
It's really cool stuff to see, and there's some kind of really new technology that they're using in this TV show. But anyway, the one thing I learned in this TV show is actually about slightly older technology, and that's about how this lady, this kind of prop and effects lady, started talking about Zerk hits. hits, and I was like, what the heck is a Zerk hit? I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, I had no idea.
And they were talking about like kind of pyrotechnic effects and like fight scenes and stuff like that. But Zerk hits are apparently plastic balls, so 68 caliber plastic balls filled with a special formulation that contains zirconium, and they're like very highly regulated, so you can't just go buy these things.
Sure.
You gotta like, you know, be I would assume very heavily insured and have you know, a permit and all this stuff to get these
Probably
things,
pretty
but
dangerous.
you can order these things. And they were talking about how expensive it was, so how much they went through in a single day of shooting or whatever. It was like 7,000 Zerk hit rounds or whatever it was. But they're plastic balls filled with zirconium. They can be fired out of a standard paintball gun, and on impact, they create this flash of spark because it's supposed to resemble the impact of an actual bullet hitting a hard surface. So it's what props people use to create the effect of, you know, a bullet hitting a metal surface, and it looks really cool. They showed it in the background, that kind of that scene that was involving a lot of these Zerk hit objects, and it was just, you know, a cool space battle or whatever. But it was neat to learn that that's how they do that kind of effect, because I never really know. I know how they do like gel packs for, you know, injuries, getting shot or something like that, so they have like exploding basically gel packs of blood and like stuff like that. I've heard of that kind of thing before, but I've never known how they do that thing that looks kind of pyrotechnic, where they're like sparks hitting. And apparently it's zirconium impacting a hard surface.
I definitely thought it was just some effect they added after the fact.
Yeah. Well, like, I mean, they look so real that I always figured that it must be some kind of actual impact. But I
feel like knowing Star Wars' budget, though, they
like
could have afforded it if it wasn't anyway. Yeah, so I think that's probably why I'm like, oh, they could just make this because it's George Lucas.
It was really interesting to learn that that's zirconium is how they do that.
Good show.
It is a good show.
The real one in the Mando is incredible, and also this version
is a great TV show. Yeah,
and we watched WandaVision, and that was fun too, and that's also on Disney Plus. So let's just end on a good thing. Let's just
the Marvel universe continues to delight. Yeah.
Anything else?
Wikipedia is 20 years old.
Yeah. Thank you, Wikipedia, for 20 years of whatever you've been doing.
1 year of fueling research on this podcast. And 20 years of fueling other kinds of research.
All of my other years of research needed. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, man, 2 weeks from now it could look a lot different. So let's just hope for good stuff.
Always look on the bright side of life. Yeah. Anyway, that's probably about a wrap.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Listeners, thanks for supporting 16 to 1.
We're trying to grow our audience, so please check us out at 16to1.com, all spelled out, and tell your friends about the show.
On our website, you can find links to follow us on social media, an archive of all our old episodes, and a contact form where you can get in touch.
Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next show.
Muscles.
Is this over yet?
Okay, sorry.